Hey guys, welcome back to CSM Woodworking. Today we're going to go over an outdoor bar for the back porch. We didn't actually have any plans for this, but it took a little longer to build. We got the tops here that ended up being from a different project and just some general lumber. We ended up having to mill down some MDF and some plywood that you'll see us use later to make the actual top of the bar. But right now, we'll get started. We're going to start out by just kind of making the frame of the bar. It's going to be built in two pieces, kind of like an L, so that way you can take it apart just because it was too big to get in our back porch in one piece. So that's why we have to kind of build it in this modular design. We're going to use pocket holes. It's our favorite thing to joint wood with, apparently. We're just making the two things kind of just squares here. We're actually making the outside part that's going to hold the bar a little taller than the rest. So that way you can have the bar top height for where you're going to serve drinks, and then behind it we'll have the countertop height where we can either make drinks, store things, and also we're going to build in a refrigerator and a keg as well throughout the video. Here we have all our pieces cut to size and assembled in the squares. Right now we're just countersinking some screws and putting it all together when it's clamped. The lower parts are where your actual counter heights are going to attach to. We're going to use figure 8 countertop mounts from Rockler, and the upper portion is where the bar top's going to sit. We're going to make some supports for those as well. Those will be later in the video. Right now I'm kind of just cutting off where we mounted it. There is a stringer under there to hold up the other side of it on the bar height side. Sorry we didn't get that on film, but it's pretty simple. It's just a stringer that's glued and nailed on the front to hold it, match the countertop height, just to give it some support. Got a bunch of rowdy friends. I didn't want the counter to fall off when we're all sitting around it one night. Here we're putting together what's going to end up being the bar top. It's just a 3/4 inch sheet of MDF, kind of laminated on top of the 3/4 inch sheet of plywood to give it a little more rigidity as well as thickness. I wanted a 1.5 inch bar top. I am cutting the MDF slightly longer and wider than the piece that I want, so that way I can flush trim it with a router bit. I will say definitely get a mask and a shop vac or something, dust extraction, because flush trimming that MDF, it turned to dust, and good Lord, did it get everywhere on everything. My wife behind me actually left the shop at that point because it was getting too dusty, so I would definitely recommend trying to catch as much of that dust or do it outside if possible. Brad nails are just put in that just to finish it up and hold it together. Here we're cutting out some supports. You can just leave them as a triangle. These is what's going to hold up the bar top. I had a little extra time and wanted to get fancy and kind of bandsaw some out here, so I ended up making one template, and then I believe there are 6 or 7 supports that we cut out on the bandsaw and kind of get them rough shape. We've got all the line trace on there. We'll take it over to our sander here in a second. You can do this with a palm sander or some sandpaper. This just makes it go a little faster, makes it easier, especially when you're making 6 or 7 of them. But what we're going to do is take these over and just mount them with screws onto the bar to support the top. That way, if anybody wants to lean on it or, anything like that, it doesn't flex too much. One of these I just had to clean up with a file and get the edges correct. Here we're just really drilling some holes. That way we can inset the screws. That way they don't stick out and you don't see them. I end up plugging those with dowel rods whenever we get it screwed in. So here's where the bar top's going to sit. We're just go ahead and putting the screws in there in the pre-drilled holes. That way it holds the bar top up, gives it a little more elegant look, as well as some extra support. We also screw these in from the back just to give it some added support, because if you're going to build something, you might as well overdo it. I put in this stringer just to attach the bar top to as well, because I thought it would flex a little bit because this frame's only 1 by. So I put another 1 inch strip of wood on top to pre-drilling some holes. I did make a mistake. I think I got a little too ahead of myself here, and it comes back to bite me right here because I don't have the room to actually get under there and put the screws in there. So I tried to use this kind of angle tool to get in there, but it just didn't quite have the power. So here I am taking the whole top off, which I regret, but it's one of those steps that if you don't think ahead, you'll end up doing things like this. So I had to take the whole top off to give me a little more room and get in there and go ahead and sink these screws into the bar top and actually secure it in place. Since we're building this in kind of like a modular design, I had to find a way to anchor it together. Here's the center where it's going to come apart. I end up using T-nuts, and I believe it was 3-inch bolts, kind of washers, just to hold them together. It actually ended up working really well and hold it together. About halfway through this bar build, I decided I needed an outlet on top just in case we wanted to use a blender or charge phones, things like that. So I ended up having to make this outlet cover because the where we're going to put the tin on, just as kind of a covering, ended up being too shallow for the outlet you see there to fit. So I just made this up, a couple scrap pieces of oak, made a square out of it. What I'm doing is cutting it a little long, so that way we can go ahead and flush trim it up. And I'm also going to put a nice routed edge on it, but we'll just let it dry and we'll finish the backing where the outlet's going to go. We're going to trace out the outlet here, and that's just our backing that we're going to use to cover up, kind of like a trim piece. So, sorry I'm kind of in the way, but we're drilling holes just to start with the jigsaw on each corner. You can leave a little space, that way you don't go over your lines. Doesn't have to be exactly perfect because eventually it's going to get covered up with outlet cover that we made, but we just don't want to make the hole too big and have it fall through the back. So here we are cutting out with the jigsaw. Just go slow and follow your lines. If you can't cut it out or make that turn, it's okay. That's what each hole's drilled for. You can always come back and clean up the corners when you get the majority of it cut out. Before we move on to the next step, I always like to dry fit it. I know it's not going directly on there, but you just want to make sure it fits. That way everything's not mounted and you have to take it back off. So I learned my lesson from obviously the bar top I had to take back off, but we're gonna just mount up some screws here. This is to mount the actual outlet cover. We're just using a countersink bit. And there it is, all mounted up. We're going to end up making trim for under the outlet as well as the top to hide those gaps. This is the fun part. I'm not much of a metal worker myself, so I'm trying to cut the trim or metal here, sorry, and put it on there to skin out the outside, give it the rustic look. I found it easier when I was mounting the tin up instead of trying to send the screws right through the metal. It took a center punch and just tap out a hole where you are going to put the screw. The key here is really making sure that you're not connecting the two pieces that need to come apart. So I wish I did have the video, but right to my left under that support is a seam where I used small quarter magnets to hold it together because I wasn't able to put any screws in there. So that's just something to keep in mind. This little design that we put in there when it comes apart, it makes it really easy to stick back together. We're just cutting down some trim pieces here as well. This is, I believe it was a 1x6 number 2 pine, making the corner pieces that are going to cover up each end of our bar as well as the corner you see right to my left where the tin is cut. I just didn't want to have any exposed edges. I'm just gluing this up into an L here. I did leave it a little long so that way I can come back and flush trim it up to the length. I believe it was 30 inches. That way both ends are, trim flush and you don't have to have it absolutely perfect because we all know it slides around a little bit when it is being glued. Here's what the installed trim piece looks like that we just made. We ended up putting 3 screws in each side, top, middle, and bottom. Just cover up those sharp edges and give it a more finished look. For the trim under the outlets, we used a 1/4 inch cove bit on both sides of this. It's just a scrap board we had. That way we got enough trim. Go ahead and finish nail it. The key is nail it into the back so it's not on that left side there, because right where my left hand is, that's where your seam is. It's going to come apart. We have our spot made up where we're going to put the kegerator. We had to drill a slightly bigger hole, use a Foster bit for that. Go ahead and just dry fit everything. We're also going to trim out the back of the bar. I want to make sure tap's not sitting right on that, so we have enough room to get that piece of wood in there. I'm just marking out the holes here. It's got a flange, so it doesn't have to be exactly perfect as far as flush screws go. I want something that's going to be able to hold it on there. The bar trim, we ended up using birch, and same thing as the trim that goes in the corners, we just made an L with it. And on each corner, we used a round over bit to kind of give it the shape. That way it was kind of easier on your wrists and arms while you're sitting there at the bar. We just used glue to attach it and some clamps, and we finished nailed it from the bottom to make sure it stayed in place. Some sanding and wood filler, and the rail actually came out. It's probably one of my favorite parts of the bar. We're also just making some final trim here just to cover up the back side. I'll show you where that goes in. It's going to end up being kind of just a very small piece of round trim here, right over my right shoulder there. That's where it's going to go, just to cover up a gap. Didn't really like it, so I want to give it a more finished look. About this time, I decided I was just about done with this project, and my wife said she wanted a second mini fridge in there to give her some space to have waters or other drinks. So we end up putting a false floor in there, give it a more finished look. That way you can slide the fridge in, it doesn't sit down and open the door. Just kind of use 2x4s there to make a floor, and that way we can still get to our bolts. And then we're going to use 3/4 inch plywood here. Actually, directly after this video, I went and bought a track saw. It's kind of just, this one did okay for a while, but it's just nicer to have an actual track saw that you lay your track right on the line, and that's where it cuts. So here's the floor that's put in. We're going to go ahead and, as I like said, dry fit everything, see if the mini fridge fits in there. As far as stain color goes, we ended up using Jocko Bean to match the chairs we built outside, and gloss polyurethane. This is a fantastic piece for entertaining, and it's really just a nice piece to have around when your friends come over. Thank you for watching my video, and we look forward to building the next project. Like and subscribe, and come back and see what we're working on next time.